My name is Stuart Elgee. I know some of you, but not all of you. I'm a professor of law and economics at the University of Ottawa and director of the university's Institute of the Environment, which is our interdisciplinary research and policy institute at the university. I've said institute a lot in that sentence, haven't I? I'm also the chair of Sustainable Prosperity, which is organizing this event today. Sustainable Prosperity is a national environment economy research and policy network based out of the University of Ottawa. We've got over 100 academics from across the country working at the interface of environment and economy, and over 100 representatives from governments, business, and NGOs who are interested in how we take that knowledge and apply it to find sustainability solutions. So a challenging and interesting space to be in. We're here today to talk about the politics of climate change. So we're actually not going to talk about the climate problem today. We're going to start from the assumption that there is a problem, and if you happen to disagree with that, you're welcome to challenge the panelists, but you'll have to start by overcoming the fact that all 10 of the warmest years in recorded history have been since 1998, and that last year was the warmest, except in Ottawa, as those of you who know. But I can assure you, though, as you were freezing here, it was the warmest year globally. But seriously, I said earlier that to me, I think there's probably no issue in the world, but possibly with issues of global hunger and poverty, but where the gap between what we know we have to do as a nation and as a planet and what we have the political will to do is greater than the issue of climate change right now. It's interesting, when you get in a room privately with government leaders, business leaders, they all understand that this is sort of a game-changing challenge we face as a planet. But they also will tell you how difficult it is politically to do the things that are necessary to get us there. The panel today will talk a little bit about those challenges, those problems. We've got the day designed to go this way. We're going to start by hearing from 3 former political leaders from France, Norway, and Quebec, who have all, in their own context, have to move forward ambitious climate policies, particularly carbon pricing, but not just carbon pricing, to talk a little bit about the opportunities, the challenges, the effectiveness of what they did. Then, after this session, we've got 3 political scientists who are among the leaders in the world in studying this problem. What can we learn from lessons around the world, particularly from Germany, Europe, parts of Canada, Australia, and how do we see that through an academic lens, and what can we learn, particularly, that will inform other governments about how we make this necessary challenge politically possible. So that's all you'll hear from me on this. We'll start out, though, and let me thank, for today's session, the reason we have these folks here is the embassies of France, Norway, and Germany have cooperated with us to bring some of these leading experts and political leaders from around the world to be here with us today. So thank you very much to the 3 of them. We're going to start out by hearing from the ambassador from France, Mr. Nicolas Chapuis, with a few words, and he may even say something about a particular climate meeting happening in France later this year, I suspect.
Thank you, Stuart. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Monsieur le Premier Ministre, Monsieur le Ministre, Madame la Ministre. It is a privilege for me to have the opportunity to address such a distinguished gathering, and I wish also to associate the thanks of the embassy, my team, to the German ambassador who is in the room, and to the Norwegian ambassador. To be able in Ottawa 6 months, a little less now than 6 months before the Paris conference, the COP21, the Conference of the Parties of the United Nations on Climate Change, 21st number of a series, is very important. Canada is a climate change player, as you all know, with its own difficulties, with its own challenges, but as you have seen, Canada is on board since the 15th of May when it published its national contribution. 38 countries are like that. We are expecting a great number of them to be able to publish their contribution before end of July, and by October, that is before the Paris conference opens on 30th of November in Paris, we hope that more than 93% of the emitters will have published their targets of reduction of emissions. This conference in Paris needs a planet mobilization. We're not going collectively to gather United Nations conferences day after day. Copenhagen, 6 years ago, was a disappointment, as you all know. We failed, once again, collectively, to answer the call of our public opinions of the people of the planet. If we fail in Paris, it is certain that we'll lose a generation before a new conference can be met. The Paris conference will gather 45,000 people in Paris in December. Never such a wide conference would have been convened anywhere in the world since the beginning of history. It is not, of course, the last chance, but it is a unique opportunity for us to get together in order to preserve the planet. If we fail, not only will we not limit the increase of temperature globally, but we will risk major security and economic catastrophes. Some of our nation states will simply disappear from the map. Some countries like Bangladesh risk a major humanitarian catastrophe. I was in British Columbia a few months ago, and the awareness of the risk on the littoral, on the coast, of the way the waters will be mounting is a real concern. And one may remember that 10,000 years ago exactly, almost day for day, Canada, all the North American plateau, had a climate change catastrophe, losing half of the maritime provinces, wiping out the first wave of the prime nations. Let's remember that history, and let's together be in a position to answer the call. Call to arms. Let's be mobilized. And what we are going to do is to have a level of ambition that can be shared worldwide. The good news are that we are feeling good vibes, a dynamic that we didn't have before Copenhagen 6 years ago. Countries are rallying because what we are trying to organize in Paris is not a technical conference. Of course, there will be various today, in fact, in Bonn this week, negotiating a very technical text. But more importantly, we'll bring in Paris the solutions, technological solutions, that the companies, the territories, the cities, the provinces, everybody will have the possibility to have a showcase in Paris to show that it is technological. It is a technological possibility. What we have to demonstrate also is the political will, collective political will to do it together. And we think it will be possible because today China wants to lead, that the European Union, as you know, has published very ambitious targets, and that we are not that Paris is not meant as an end, but as a beginning of something new that will be legally binding, universal, to bring the possibility to limit this increase of global temperature. So our expectations today with the panel we have, political panel first, academic panel secondly, is that we will share, we will debate, we will exchange in a way that when you go home tonight, you will be a new militant of the Paris Conference. Thank you.
So, is this working or does it matter? You guys can hear me okay? All right. So let me start out then, and I'll warn all of you that Patricia is really mean, and she's been assigned the unenviable task of keeping politicians to a time limit. So she will have the usual intimidating signs that will rise, and then the trap door will open at the appropriate moment. So we'll start out with that stern warning to a man who really, if anyone needs no introduction in Canada, it would be Jean Charest. He was, I didn't actually know this, the youngest MP ever elected to the House of Commons at age 28. Now, 5 years later, in the meantime, he's done a few things. He was Canada's Federal Minister of the Environment. He actually led the Canadian delegation to the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, which was the genesis of the current Global Climate Treaty, under which all of these discussions are happening. Went on to do many other things, leader of the Federal Conservative Party, Premier of Quebec for 3 terms, brought in the first carbon tax in Canada, and initiated Quebec becoming the first jurisdiction to bring a cap-and trade system into Canada as well. Jean, pleased to have you say a few words about how you did all that.
Well, thank you very much, Stuart. And you did mention politicians. So I'm an ex-politician. I'll talk as long as I want. But in case I do decide, how much time do you want us to go?
Maybe if we go for 20 minutes.
20? Well, we'll try to. Is it working now? Can you hear me? Here, maybe I'll get it closer. Can you hear me?
It's not great.
It's not great? Now is it better? Okay, I'm told. Okay, thank you. Well, let me start by thanking you for the invitation, Stuart. I'm delighted to be attending this event. I'm delighted also that the French ambassador is with us today and co-hosting, and the German ambassador also is attending, and a Norwegian ambassador. It speaks very highly of their respective commitments in their respective countries to this issue. I was in France last week, Ambassador Chapuis, and I know and I've seen in my travels the very high priority that the government of France has put on the COP meeting in December, and it's impressive. Whether it's your Minister Fabius or Madame Royal, they're all over the world and working extremely hard so that it will be a success. In my remarks, I want to talk about economic instruments, but I want to go back a bit to talk about how important this issue is for Canada and a little history. I was elected for the first time in 1984 and in the riding of Sherbrooke, Quebec, and in my neck of the woods there was an issue of acid rain. And I remember during that campaign this being an issue that I had espoused, that I cared about. But just for the purpose of speaking to how leadership is important in regards to this issue, a lot of us have forgotten that when Brian Mulroney becomes leader of the opposition in 1983, he's invited to the White House by Mr. Reagan, who obviously at the time didn't have a very good relationship with Mr. Trudeau. And they probably thought politically this was a good idea. Mr. Mulroney goes to Washington and he has to make a choice in regards to what issue he's going to raise. And a lot of us has forgotten that, but the issue he did raise was acid rain, SO2 emissions. This was in 1983. And then when the government of Mr. Mulroney is elected, I remember very distinctly that this was one of the key bilateral issues between Canada and the United States. At the beginning, the government of Mr. Reagan thought this was not an issue. They just would not admit that this was a problem. And then there was the Irish Summit, the naming of eminent individuals to examine the issue. They nailed down the science, and once they nailed down the science, well, things fell into place. And then the solutions became something that had to be dealt with. And it led to the Clean Air Act of 1990 and the changes that created a trading system for SO2 emissions, by the way. I point to that because I want you to know I'm of the school of those who believe that if we are going to be successful in addressing these issues, that we have to have the ability to look back at what we have done successfully. And there are more successes out there than what we acknowledge spontaneously in regards to how we've dealt with issues on sustainable development and the environment. And this is one of them. I always, and I'm always surprised you point to this trading system that exists. Most people don't know it exists. It does, and it works. It doesn't work perfectly, nothing does, but it works. I remember the Montreal Protocol as being the first major protocol to have a differentiation between developed and developing countries. And again, the key to its success, by the way, is that the Reagan administration in 1988 supported it because they thought it was a good economic policy. And this is also part of what we've been able to do that has had a marked effect on the ozone layer, for example. And so the story unfolds this way in a government where it was understood that on the issue of climate change, that Canada, being a northern country, was going to be affected more rapidly and in a more dramatic fashion than probably the average countries. And the simple view, quite to sum it up, of the government of the day was that if Canada had any hope that other jurisdictions would make the right decision and would go in the right direction, that we as a country had to show leadership. That it wasn't enough for us to say we follow someone else. And that was the view, the general view of the government of Canada. I should say supported by the opposition. And that's a key. We're talking about implementation of policy at the time. In the House of Commons, and when I become Minister of the Environment in 1991, my critic is Paul Martin of the Liberal Party of Canada. And a very strong critic, by the way, a pretty fierce critic, and who engaged us in very strong debates. And so not only is it the government that is in this direction, in this mode, but also the opposition parties, including the NDP, are pushing the government in the direction in which we are come to the conclusion that we have to address these issues, that it's the right thing to do. And so as we moved ahead, the first time that I remember being approached or reflecting upon this issue of carbon trading, carbon taxes, was when I think it's the Department of Finance published a paper on economic instruments in the early 1990s. Paul Martin, in the federal campaign of 1993, had made a commitment that this would be a major piece of the Liberal government's, if they were to be elected, platform and economic policy. But I remember very distinctly that at that time, the whole question of economic instruments was taking more and more space in the discussions that we were having about what we needed to do if we were going to effectively address environmental issues. And so it moved from there. We implemented the Green Plan. When I became Minister of the Environment in 1991, we were preparing the Earth Summit in Rio. We did something that I felt was key. We recognized something that a lot of people lose sight of in Canada if we're going to do anything effective. We live in one of the most decentralized federations in the world. The provinces are responsible for natural resources, and if we are going to implement any kind of effective policy, you have to take that into account. You cannot pretend that it is otherwise, and you need then to mobilize the provincial governments, A, and B, from a national perspective, if you have your leadership right, to coordinate them in the same direction. You can't impose it upon them, and coordinate them at least to bring them in the same direction. In Rio in 1992, the provinces were all at the table. We had a very inclusive process, and it served us very well in the follow-up so that we could more successfully implement policy. Of course, there's a change of government. Kyoto appears, the Kyoto Protocol meetings happen, and I don't think Mr. Chrétien did it deliberately, but the federal government reverted to form, did not bring the provinces along. Frankly, I think that was a mistake. Not intentional, not at all, but it was a mistake in regards to further implementation of the policies and the commitments that were made. We would have all been better served had they taken a more inclusive approach on this issue, as Canada must do. I get elected in 2003 in Quebec, and at the time, of course, I have had the benefit of this experience. I met a moment ago Mr. John Stone, who was the scientific advisor in the day that I was there, and David Runnels is here. You know, from a personal perspective, when I became the Federal Minister of the Environment, it was for me a period of revelation. It was quite extraordinary. To be there, I remember the excitement of being at the forefront of changes in the economy, in the area of science, of social policy, and the Earth Summit, and it was, for me, a moment in my life that changed me. And I carried that forward, of course, when I became leader of the Liberal Party of Quebec and was in government. And when we came into government, we came in with a very determined agenda on the issues of sustainable development. One of the realities of government here, I think everywhere in the world, Brice Lalonde can speak to that, and Minister Halverson can speak to that, is that on these kind of issues, the leadership at the top counts. And you know, if you coordinate in government, for example, I've learned 1,000 times, it happens from the top down. You don't coordinate from the bottom up. And you can try, it's tough, but it happens from the top down. So if the leader of the government and the leadership of the government, if you put it plural, is committed to these issues, well then you are really within the zone where things can happen. If the level of commitment is also palpable from the public's point of view, that will also be a very strong signal sent to those who are concerned that things will happen. Now this is an intangible, but I'll try to illustrate it for you. If you're the premier of the province and you're saying, I'm going to do a carbon tax, and I'm the premier, and I've been here before, and they know that you are strongly determined to do it, they're not going to take a lot of time trying to persuade you not to do it. They're going to take a lot of time trying to persuade you to implement it in a way that will not hurt them or be against their interest or contrary to their interest. But that nuance is key in whether or not things will actually happen. So in 2003, our government is elected, and we start the process of implementing a very broad environmental development policy and a sustainable development policy for the whole government. I had learned from my experience on the Green Plan, for example, that the Green Plan of the Mulroney government had been imposed on the machinery of government. It had not been a natural birth. There had not been a strong adhesion to the Green Plan within the machinery of government, and it made its life that much more vulnerable. I was determined when I came in that there'd be a very strong commitment and buy-in to what we were doing, and that we make all the efforts necessary to make that happen. By the way, as a footnote in history, who was my first Minister of the Environment? Tom Mulcair. And what happened afterwards, another story. I'm keeping that for my memoirs that I strongly recommend, by the way. But we implemented this policy. Actually, it was Tom who led that within government, and it's still obviously a mainstream of the government's policy. We pursued the idea that we needed a climate change policy, but we also combined it with a policy on transport at the time. We felt that it was very important we combine both, and we implemented, as Stuart pointed to a moment ago, the first carbon tax that we described as a levy that we imposed on those who were the wholesalers of energy and oil and gas in the province. And one of the features that allowed us to succeed, frankly, is the fact that our opposition in our political forum at the time was generally in favor of what we were doing. They weren't going to go out there and congratulate us for us, but they were not opposed to it, which is a huge difference in regards to any political forum. We imposed a $200 million a year levy, $1.2 billion total over 6 years was the plan. We set a very clear objective of meeting the Kyoto Protocol objective of reducing by 6% at 1990 levels for 2012, and we did meet that objective while simultaneously having 54% economic growth in that period of time. So no, it is not just because there was a recession. There was real growth and real effort, and this within an economy where 98% of the energy that is domestically produced is renewable, and in total of what we consume, 50% of the energy is renewable in Quebec, which is among the highest levels in the world. We moved on to in 2008 to adhesion to the Western Climate Initiative. At the time we entered, there was a number of American states that were there. There must have been 6 or 7, and the provinces of Manitoba, British Columbia, and Ontario were on board. And when the financial and economic recession hit in 2008, most of them left. We stayed, and we stayed based on the conviction that this economic instrument of a carbon trading system was the right way to go for us among other instruments. Now keep in mind, we're applying both. We have the carbon tax, and we're going to do both, and we still have both in Quebec now. to cover all the angles. And so we proceeded with this with a very high level of determination, with a great deal of consultation with industry in a very orderly process that allowed us to identify huge emitters. I remember us passing the regulation that forced anyone who was producing more than 10,000 tons of CO2 emissions a year to report, legally had to report, which allowed us to capture exactly what it is and who it is that we were going to be working with as we reduced emissions. We worked with the state of California, who they stayed on board because of the leadership of Governor Schwarzenegger, followed by Governor Brown. And then we are now in the process of implementing. In the meantime, we stood alone to a large degree, but continued to receive good and strong public support. Why? In the end, I think it's because we had a very clear view of what we were doing and why we were doing it. There was clarity. There was no hesitation. There was no obfuscation about what we were doing. We knew what we wanted, why we were doing it, and we were able, because we do that, we were able to communicate it effectively. Remember that rule, and in politics, when people get into trouble, well, we're not communicating well. The guy writing the press release or the girl's not doing a good job. I can tell you from experience, the real story is this. Maybe you're not saying what they want to hear, or maybe they're offering something people don't want. The rule is, if you're clear in what you're doing, and we led. It wasn't that public opinion was pushing us to do a carbon trading system. We said to Quebecers at the time, this is the answer, we believe it's right, and went out there and presented it and defended it. And so that was key to the implementation of this policy. Having combined it with a fund of $1.2 billion, we then were able to make a demonstration that we were able to fund transport projects. The biggest emitter of CO2 emissions in Quebec is the transport sector. Contrary to other places because of the benefit of hydroelectricity. And so we are now in the process of implementing this policy, and the province of Ontario very recently joined us, and something that was a key victory for Quebec. But to have Ontario finally come on board, join us in this system is creating some momentum. I'll close by saying this. I'm very optimistic about Paris. I'd like to say, Ambassador, frankly, that I think your government has done an exceptionally good work in preparing Paris, and you should be commended for that. The Europeans are very committed to this meeting, this COP meeting also, and I am optimistic. And ironically, your timing's very good, Stuart, because what I saw in Europe last week is that there seems to be some sense that the success of Paris could be determined on whether or not there's a consensus on doing a carbon tax. And that's not what I was hearing 6 months ago, but when I was in Paris, that's what I was hearing, that if there was a consensus coming out of Paris that we do a carbon initiative, whether it's carbon trading, carbon tax, something else, use of economic instruments, that may be one, if not the most important element to determine the success of the meeting in Paris. And I hope that will be the case, and I hope that Canada will show leadership in this regard. I'm optimistic. I think the provinces of Quebec and Ontario and British Columbia and others have done it, and we should march on to Paris with a view of more success for all of the country, and hopefully have our American neighbors join us in this consensus with other emerging economies. Thank you very much.
Next, Christine Halverson. I have had the pleasure, and it has been a pleasure, of knowing Christine in person only for 24 hours. Yes. We've worked her very hard in that 24 hours, and she has been spoken probably to more media than most Canadians do in a lifetime here. I guess the short part of her bio is this, is that she was the Norway's finance minister from 2005 to 2009. She was a deputy prime minister in the government from 2005 to 13. She left government a year or so ago and is now the director of Cicero, which is one of the world's most respected climate research institutes based in Norway. And what's particularly interesting to me from the story I've learned from her is that as Canadians, we're a northern country. We're, to some extent, a natural resource and fossil fuel intensive economy. And we often say that's why we can't take a leadership position on climate change. But Norway is all those things too. And they have a very high carbon tax on the oil industry, and it's still competitive. It's very innovative. And they take almost all the wealth from that and put it towards the future, not the present. So we'll hear a little bit more about why that happens and how that's happened and what maybe some of the lessons that might be worth learning for Canada. Thanks.
I prefer to stand, if it's possible. Thank you so much for inviting me. I've had 24 very interesting hours. I'm a bit jet-lagged, so I'm early. Started early this morning. And I'm very curious about the discussion going on when it comes to climate policy in Canada. Because I think of Canada as a Nordic country. It should be. We have so much in common. But now I see that the Canada's voice and the Nordic countries' voice when it comes to climate negotiations in Paris are quite different. But I really hope, and I'm not in a position to interfere with the Canadian discussion, but I hope that some examples from Norway can encourage those who want to have good examples, because good examples can improve ambitions when it comes to climate issues. I know some faces from yesterday because I was here talking about both the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway and some experience that we have with carbon taxes. I thought I should not speak about the Sovereign Wealth Fund today, but just say very briefly that all our revenues from the oil and gas sector, including taxes, including the CO2 taxes that I'm going to tell you about in a short while, goes into the fund. And then we've estimated a real return at 4%, which is what we can use in the budget every year. But how, if we are using 4%, more or less, is decided by the situation in the economy. If it's heated or the growth is high, we use less. When I was the finance minister, I took over from a conservative minister. He used more than 4% all his years, and I started to use less. And he's mad at me. Still mad at me. But it also meant that during the financial crisis, we could use more than 4% and fight unemployment. Because we have this long time horizon and this fiscal rule that we stick to. So, well, if you want to know more about that, I can tell you something about it afterwards. But just to mention, around 20% of our GDP is connected to the oil and gas sector. It's less in Canada. So we are a northern oil and gas producing country. We have a lot in common with Canada. Okay, before speaking about taxes, I think I have to say something about taxes because it's part of the discussion. I don't think that any Norwegian love taxes. I don't. I was the prime minister. Even I didn't love taxes. I accept taxes when I know that they are, used for good purposes. The average income tax in Norway is around 30%, but we also have other taxes and VAT. So we pay more taxes than Canadians do. And I often meet people from Canada or from the US, and they are always shocked about, the level of taxes in Norway. And then I sit down with them and say, okay, what do you get back from all the taxes you pay? And then I tell them about a quite generous pension and unemployment benefits. Healthcare and education is free. Norwegian students do not pay any tuition fees at university. So when when push comes to shove, I would claim that we are better off because we get a lot in return for what we actually pay in taxes. Well, this is just to say something about the climate, the political climate around discussions on taxes. Of course, it's always part of a political campaign or an election, but seen from abroad, seen from Canada or the US, it's not that big disagreements when it comes to we'd like to have a welfare state, we're proud of it, and we know that we have to pay for it. Of course, all the parties, well, the parties at the right side of the politics, they are always campaigning for a little less taxes. And we say, okay, we'll stick to the taxes we have, but we will try to improve from the left of the politics. Okay. So, yeah. There is, I think, there is a high general acceptance for paying taxes in Norway. And I think that we today can see the same political consensus about the need for carbon pricing and that we would like to shift from an income-based taxation system and more into a green taxation system. But I have to admit that it is connected to the fact that the most right-wing party in Norway is now in government, because they are those who always were in the position to protest against all kind of higher taxes. So I think what you also mentioned, how is the opposition behaving when you are discussing taxes? That is very important for the climate, the space you have when you discuss it. Okay, 25 years ago, Gro Harlem Brundtland, she lost the election, but she proposed to introduce a carbon tax on our offshore industry before she left office, and her successor from the Conservative Party actually did it. The level of this tax is between 70 and 75 Canadian dollars. We were among the first in the world to price carbon. It was, of course, a part of the discussion. It was not heavily protests against it. It was accepted, and now, 25 years later, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, they are competing to take the honor for having introduced it. So this is a success story from Norway. It has led to that the Norwegian oil and gas fields rank among the most environmentally friendly in the world. Emissions per oil unit is close to 1/3 of the global average. The largest effect of these carbon taxes came in the first years after it was introduced. Flaring on offshore Norwegian platforms has stopped completely. It's possible for security reasons, but it's completely stopped. And emissions from this sector has gone down, and it has led to a Norwegian petroleum and gas industry that is more innovative than the oil and gas industry in very many other countries, and also the supply industry, which is very important for the mainland activity, has been more innovative. Especially when it comes to turbines, they tell me, there has been innovation, and turbines are used not only in the oil and gas sector, also in other energy sector and other kind of industry. So that is important. Now, I've tried to find out what would the emissions from the oil and gas industry, what is the effect when it comes to emissions, carbon emissions connected to this? And it's very hard to give you a specific number because the extraction of oil and gas has increased in the latest, during these 25 years. And it's different between oil and gas and new and old fields, and yeah, well. But I think I can say that the first years after the introduction, the effect of introducing this tax was around 16% reduced emission. Yeah, but during all these years, it's quite hard to find out the direct effect of the carbon tax. It led to one of the first carbon capture storage projects. No, it's not a demonstration. This is Sleipner. That is an offshore field, oil field, and they captured and stored carbon in the sandstone under the North Sea. So that was a huge project. It's still going on. And they did the same in another field years later, Snøhvit. They also capture and storage carbon in the stone under the sea. I don't think they would have done that if it wasn't the price on carbon. So that is important. Well, not only the petroleum industry is paying a carbon tax, as much as 80% of Norway's greenhouse gas emissions are subject to carbon pricing through the carbon tax or through the European Union emission trading systems. And these systems cover several greenhouse gases, not only CO2. We also have research that tells us something about the effect of the EU ETS system. But the problem with that system is that the price on the allowances is very low. But with the low price, the effect is 2 to 4% of the total capped emissions. It's more than many other similar systems. But if it was possible to increase the price on the allowances, it would be a much more efficient system. So that is a part of the discussion in EU countries, and we are a part of this. We're not members of the EU, but we are part of EU's climate policy. So that is a part of the discussion on the pathway to Paris, how to strengthen the ETS system in Europe. Okay, so that was a very, hopefully an inspiring example. Now I will tell you about some failure I've done. That is much more entertaining. Now, when I was serving as a finance minister, we suggested raising the CO2 tax on car petrol with 10 øre. That is less than 2 Canadian dollar cents. Very little. And it led to big protests. There were trucks blocking Oslo, the city of Oslo, and the leader of the most right-wing party in Norway, she was, at the barricades, opposing the government. I think that was very much noise for very little money. The revenues were, very tiny. It was, yeah. But we implemented it together with some other tax changes. I'll come back to that. I think that we should have been more brave. 10 Norwegian øre is nothing. We should said 1 krone. That is 10 times as much. And then we should have some very concrete projects, not earmarked, because that is very inefficient. I know there is a lot of economists in this, among the audience. It doesn't have to be directly earmarked in the ministry, but you could at the same time, for instance, increase investments in public transport, make buses go more often, buy new ones, yeah, you know, all of that. So there is a story, a narrative. And that is what I think we failed to do. All this noise for very little money. So that is part of the discussion. But we did something very interesting connected to increased CO2 taxes on petrol. And that is connected to buying cars in Norway, because we have quite a high price on purchase of cars. And we looked into this and made it cheaper to buy less polluting cars. And those who buy electric cars pay no taxes at all. It made Tesla cheap in Norway compared to other cars. It was amazing. And the total effect of this was that emissions from new cars since 2007 has gone down with more than 40%. We are the country with most electric cars per capita than any other country. And Norway stood for 31% of all electric cars that were sold in Europe last year. And now that is a very good story to tell, because it shows something that is popular. I don't know if you've ever been in a Tesla. I was looking for the champagne, whereas I'm not used to, you know, these kind of very exclusive cars. And thanks to our environmental taxes and the big demand for electric cars, we have created an interesting market for electric car producers. So the Norwegian demand for electric cars actually is a driver for the international developing of electric cars. And that has many side effects. Also, when it comes to develop more efficient batteries, because that is also interesting for renewables, solar, wind, in other connections. So a small nation can do something. We can actually use the opportunity to create markets and demand to that is interesting for developing climate-friendly cars in this cars when I talk about that, but that can be done in very many other countries. Germany has done it when it comes to solar. It's some kind of the same story. Not with taxes, but with other measures. Okay, my time is 2 minutes. 2 minutes. No, I think, well, the most affecting measure for reducing greenhouse gas emissions would be a global carbon pricing. And it is a lot of interesting things happening connected to that. But it will not be the result of the negotiations in Paris that we have one global high price on carbon. We know that around 40 countries, 20 cities and states and provinces already use the carbon pricing mechanism or are planning to implement them. And that covers actually 22% of global emissions. So it's important. And if we have this bottom-up process towards Paris, and this carbon pricing inspires others to do the same, then all investors have to look into what is going to be, what is the plans for carbon pricing where they are investing. Even if it's not there, they will have to deal with some kind of shadow pricing. And then we can, you know, in the end, have a global carbon price. So I think this is very important, very interesting. I hope, and I will follow after my visit, of course, even more than before the discussion in Canada. I think it's really very interesting. I hope to hear the Canadian voice loud and clear in Paris, and that we can cooperate well. Cooperate to take the steps forward that are needed. Thank you very much.
And last but not least on this first panel is Monsieur Brice Lalonde. Brice has done far too many things to go through all of them, but he started out as the former Green Party leader of France, and he was France's Minister of the Environment for many years. He was then the executive coordinator of the Earth Summit 20 years after Rio, the Rio Plus 20 Summit that really set the current agenda for sustainable development, and has been actively involved in climate discussions at the domestic and international level for many, many years. So he'll talk to us a little bit about the experience in France and maybe say a global word or two. We never know.
Good afternoon. I don't know if this is working. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be in Canada when the ice is breaking. I want to tell you a story. Copenhagen, because some of you said it was a failure. I was in Copenhagen. As you know, in Copenhagen, all these conferences, they last a fortnight, 2 weeks. And in the end, ministers come and are set to try to solve the problems negotiators could not have solved themselves. Do we have some Danish people in the room?
No, but we are almost Danish.
Okay.
So you don't want to hear what he's going
No,
to say?
but I want, no.
Okay. So let's say it was not so well organized, and the whole conference. The food was bad. The whole conference was going to a mess, an awful mess. And the head of states were invited, and they were invited to drink some champagne with the Queen and to celebrate the success of the conference. But when they arrived, the mess. And I saw something fantastic, and I want to share that with you. It was so fantastic. The head of states decided to negotiate themselves. They said, no champagne. Too bad for the Queen and for the dinner. Let's stay here, negotiate the whole night, whole day after, and perhaps part of the second night. They did that. They did that in such uncomfortable conditions you can't even imagine. In a room which is 1/3 of this one, with no windows, no translation. The guards did not even know who they were allowed to let in or not let in. So you had head of states, ministers, ambassadors, and tourists taking pictures, crowded in the room. And in spite of these incredible conditions, head of state negotiated the Copenhagen Accord. 2 pages. Magic of politics, 2 pages. The negotiation text today is 89 pages in English, because in Spanish it's a bit longer, and you know. 2 pages, they went to the core of the problem. 2 degrees Celsius, they agreed on the limit of 2 degrees Celsius. They decide. I remember Obama arriving with a paper written in Chinese. I didn't know he knew how to read Chinese. And he was saying, I've got it, I've got it. What did he have? He had the agreement of the Chinese to have the accountability system, MRV, measure, report, and verify. Fantastic victory, because it took time to negotiate with the Chinese. It was not so easy. And on the other hand, you had Sarkozy and Gordon Brown and some others, which had discussed with the Africans and the others, 100 billion a year as from 2020 from the north to the south. That was the agreement. They got it. The next day, after the head of states had gone a bit tired home, 5 countries said, oh, we don't agree because we were not in the little room. So we had to wait for 1 year. And Cancun, it was agreed in Cancun. So the Copenhagen Accord was a fantastic geopolitical move, which head of states got themselves. And what's very interesting is that head of states did not go in that usual summit. You know, they have the script, the speech, and they read, and they follow themselves one after the other. No, there they were squeezed in a little room and not allowed to leave before having found an accord. So that's the way we have to go. But do you know why it's the way we have to go? Because do you think the future of humanity on this planet is not a matter for head of states? Well, for who is it a matter then? It's a matter for head of states, because only these head of states can overcome 195 countries defending national interests, but not the planet, not humanity. Only head of states can go over, beyond national interests. And so I'm very happy that the French government has decided probably to have a summit just before the conference, to invite the head of states to give instructions to negotiators to move and to get to an agreement. So it's yes, as you said, Jean, and most of you, it looks as if it's shining a little, huh? Obama, the Chinese, everybody, INDC, it's moving. We know we still have hurdles. We know complicated hurdles. For instance, differentiation. What does that mean? Some countries say it's not fair. I haven't emitted anything. Why should I do the same thing as you? So we have to find the equity. It's very difficult to find the equity. Things like that. Money, accountability, status, because is it going to be a treaty? No, we know the United States cannot ratify anything. It hasn't ratified anything for the last 10 years. I mean, so because of the polarization. So we have to find some way to overcome that sort of stuff. Okay. The main problem, if I want to draw your attention on that, the main problem is that we talk about an environmental convention or an environmental negotiation. But we are probably wrong, because the other countries, developing countries, they say it's a development convention. So there's that malentendu we have to try to overcome also. It's also development. It's also about, as Mr. Clinton said, the economy is stupid. Yes, so, okay, so this is very important. And what's new and so encouraging for the last 2 years is that now business is becoming part of it. Business is saying, hey, are we serious about it? Business is not here to destroy the planet, okay? So business wants to be part of the solution, and business is saying to governments, listen, if you're serious, put long-term, predictable, visible policies so we can invest. We know we don't want to have feed-in tariffs which change at least majority. It must be the same, it must stay the same, and like that we'll trust each other and we'll do it. And local governments also. The example of Canada, fantastic, bravo. And look at cities, C40 cities. Now they want to be 500 cities. Look, if we have public procurement, putting together all these cities, it creates a huge market and we can do things. So things are moving in the good direction because it's all about also the world economy. It's not only about negotiations, it's also about the world economy. The world economy is moving. Never have we seen the solar economy going so fast. The resources, incredible, the solar, the renewables, it's going faster than the fossil fuel investments. So, I mean, things are going in the right direction. Now, you wanted me to talk about the carbon pricing. Okay. Never talk about taxation. Jesus, good. Never. I was so surprised when I heard lots of environmentalists talk about environmental taxation. Jesus Christ, if environment and taxation go together, I'm not an environmentalist anymore. Say something else. Say we're going to create jobs. Because what is the problem? We have to shift our taxation systems. All our taxation systems have been created when labor was scarce and resources infinite. Today it's exactly the contrary. Labor, we're, 8 billion people soon. Labor is not scarce anymore, but resources are getting scarce. So shift the damn thing. But don't talk about environmental taxation. Just do it. Just do it. I mean, that's the answer. Otherwise, you're in political trouble. I mean, you won't do it. So we had this experience in France too. As you know, we are a member of the European Union, and even Norway now is member, nearly like Switzerland, the best friends of the European Union, because we share the ETS together. We share a cap and trade system together. So we have the cap and trade, and the European is now, the European Union is doing, quite a lot of good job, and, both bad and good. We have decided to go minus 40% in 2030 of greenhouse gas emissions. And all countries, the 28 countries have been asked to do it. I mean, you have to implement this. And we have a great help from something called the Commission, which gives a roadmap to all of us. And I always say that in the United Nations, there's no commission, so there's no roadmap. So the 195 countries are waiting for the roadmap to fall from somewhere. And it's not falling, of course, very difficult. So in the European Union, we have a system which helps us, I would say, to have a roadmap. And in France, we tried to introduce a carbon tax. Twice we tried. Twice the court said, no, it's not fair. I think the judges didn't quite understand. It was a bit complicated, and there we are. So in the end, we've got it without talking about it. So we introduced it by simply, I would say, increasing the taxes we already have on fossil fuels and making them more balanced. So today, if you buy a gasoline for your car, the carbon equivalent tax would be something like 265 euros a ton, which makes it quite expensive, but it's not diffused in all areas of the economy. So the question is, how do we diffuse that? How do we change the pattern of the economy, and how do we help? So this is where we are right now. We have just voted a law, Madame Royal, which Jean has met a few times. Huh? So she's the Minister for the Environment. She just had introduced a law in front of the Parliament, which is called the Law for Green Growth, and it asks the French to reduce by 50% the consumption of overall energy by 2050, to reduce by 40% greenhouse gases by 2030, to increase by 30% the renewable share, and et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, the question now, okay, so how do we do it? So that's the main question. The law is there, and now we should try to implement it with all our friends in the European Union. We'll do it. We'll do it. So, your turn.
You get the award for not even getting the first
Merci.
sign from Patricia. Thank you. Well, because of the remarkable efficiency and brevity of our panelists, we have a little bit of time for questions. I'll give you the teaser, is that we will have, after the political science panel, you'll have a chance to kind of have a conversation with all 6 of the experts today. And that should be kind of interesting to get the politicians and the academics talking with each other about the theory and the practice and whether the two actually connect. But we've probably got about 20 minutes now before our break. So please go up to the mic and we'll take questions up there. And we'll go for about 20, 25 minutes, take a break, and come back and do round 2. Thank you, Maureen.
Hello, my name is Jean-Marc Mangin. I just happened to, with the University of Ottawa, to be organizing the week of activity with Congress 2015. But I was in Copenhagen in 2010. And it's a short little story to tell. I was leading a new international coalition of civil society called Tick, 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 Global Call for Climate Action. And that coalition would not have seen the light of day without Jean Charest, because they give us a seed funding for the Secretariat to be established in Montreal, and within a few months, we're able to rally 350 civil society organizations from across the world, which led to the largest demonstration ever in the street of Copenhagen. During Congress, during Copenhagen, 20%, so there was a lot of positive energy, and as Ambassador Lalonde pointed out, we just, by the seat of our pants, managed to get this Copenhagen agreement. The model was that to have this. The strategy behind it was to have this civil society coalition working very closely with the UN, working with in this case, Denmark, and like-minded state to try to shift, to establish a breakthrough. I think you've said enough about the performance of Denmark already, but I want to put a bit of pressure on what's happening now in terms of establishing a breakthrough for Paris. Are the conditions there to go beyond what's in the text right now in front of the negotiators? Is there a possibility for a more visionary breakthrough, or do we have to just be happy with a more incremental approach that seems to be in the cards?
Well, I guess just to recap the question, I guess what are we expecting? Are we going to go further than what we have seen in the text up until now? And the point I was making a little earlier from what I picked up in France when I was there, and I saw the people from l'Élysée, and I saw Nicolas Hulot very briefly. We met in a fortuitous way. Was that, to my surprise, it seems that part of what seems to be developing would be an agreement on carbon tax and an economic instrument. Of course, it can be as much a tax as it can be a carbon trading system. But one of the discussions that is emerging, progressing, seems to be that there would be something in that regard that would emerge. Now, in the last few weeks, you may have seen the World Bank study that was published, very interesting, tells a story, a very good story. We like to see that when it appears, those of us who care about these issues, because it gives a context, it gives the negotiators and the governments an ability to understand what is happening elsewhere, and that they're not alone out there. So I'm optimistic about that. I think that's a good thing, and it's a timing factor also. I mean, it creates positive timing in regards to the use of either a carbon tax or carbon trading. I know Brice wants to say a word. Why is it important that, from my perspective? Because the carbon trading system will work much more effectively when we reach a critical mass throughout the world of countries that do it. And so those who go first pay a high price potentially for it, because they're the laboratory. They get part of it wrong. We know Europe got its carbon trading system wrong. They called it, they did not successfully implement it. They got the pricing wrong, and they had a bad coordination with also energy policy. So we draw lessons from that. But if you get a coordinated approach, then I think you're really in the business of successfully reducing greenhouse gas emissions, at least with that instrument. Brice, was it?
Just to say that the French presidency would like to have an outcome with 4 items. The first item would be the structure of the agreement. For how long, who does what, do we keep the flexibility mechanism from Kyoto, etc., things like that. The second item would be the contributions of the members of the states. And these why are they going to be different? Because these contributions should be upgraded every 5 years. That's the idea. A third item, something on finance, a financial package or technological and financial package. And what's very interesting, the French presidency would like to have a fourth item, which is contribution from non-state actors for the first time, and they want it to be integrated in the agreement.
Hi, my name is Sharon Howarth, and I have daughters which are in their late 20s, and so climate change is absolutely the scariest, not only for them, but they have to live with other people, but also for baby boomers, right? And so I looked around at organizations, I found Citizens Climate Lobby, and they're calling for a carbon pricing mechanism. So I thought, well, that's where I will use my voice to keep supporting a carbon pricing mechanism. So I do want to know if that's the correct way to go, because Citizens Climate Lobby, their carbon fee and dividend, the revenue neutral, is simple, and it's easy to explain, and you get buy-in from the public because it's revenue neutral, but all the money goes directly to the public, and Stuart spoke at our conference last year. So that's the carbon pricing mechanism that makes sense to me. I'm glad to see that the media's picked up on that, and a lot of that is because our environment minister in Ontario, Glenn Murray, has brought in cap and trade. Now, if the mechanism is the best way to go, and I can speak about the economy with that mechanism, because through Citizens Climate Lobby, I have the reports that support that it's good for the economy, right? And I do have a problem with cap and trade. It's very interesting that you say a coordinated or whatever word that you use, but this is the trouble. I feel, and even the Eco-Fiscal Commission will say, it's got to be now. By now means you've got to have public buy-in, and you have to have the right and the left on board. And I see cap and trade not, it'll be an extra cost to the public, but they get nothing back. Yeah. So, you know, it's going to be difficult. I think with fee and dividend, we can start it, and then we can work with it. So, sticking to carbon pricing and this fee and dividend, is that the best that I can use my voice in? Because I did appreciate your comments, sir, at the end. That was very good. And you know, do I focus on the media, letters to the editor, you know, and keep speaking about carbon pricing, or like where is my voice going to be most effective?
Well, and interestingly enough, your question is very political in that way. And let's look at two worlds, Quebec and Ontario. In Quebec, carbon trading was well received. It was, and I'm not going to pretend that everyone on the street understands carbon trading in Quebec, frankly. there's a reasonable, amount of information people can absorb, and their lives are more than just about paying attention to all this. But instinctively, people sort of understand they understand, I think, what it's about. There's no pushback, and they understand the government's committed to this tool to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a high level of acceptability. Ontario. Now, on Ontario, your energy picture here is very different from that of Quebec. The price of energy is higher, 60% higher, if you're paying for electricity at home and domestic energy, and you have a different environment. And in carbon trading is not going to be received the same way in Ontario as it is in Quebec. And what you're saying is you have to take that into account if you're going to be successful, because if you don't, you may have the best theory in the world, but that's all you'll have at the end of the day if you're not able to implement it. And so you do speak to those two realities. Now, one of the things that does make a difference, though, is that if all your neighbors are doing it and everyone is around you, it does give governments cover. In other words, if it's not well received in your jurisdiction, but the federal government, the province next door, the American, the state of New York are doing it, and you have an environment where the world is signing on to this, it makes it easier in difficult jurisdictions to advance this. One word on carbon trading, one of the things I like about it, it is a driver of innovation. And what it does, it allows those who are the emitters, it encourages them to do the research, to create the technology, to develop the technologies that don't yet exist to be able to reduce carbon. And it's a driver of innovation as a method of implementing a policy. That's one of the features that I like about that. But your question's very political in that way, and you have to measure that if you're, and this is the political panel, if you're on the political side, you have to figure out. One word about when you go out there and you say to people, it's going to be revenue neutral, frankly, most of the time, they don't believe you. and you know what? They think you're lying. And it's at your risque et péril, you're out there, it's going to be revenue neutral, won't cost you more. You're running the very high risk of a strong pushback. Not everywhere, but a strong pushback. So that's a challenge to go out there and present it that way. A word on the Eco-Fiscal Commission. The timing of it's very interesting. Why? The person who proposed this, Chris Reagan, says governments are having to reconfigure their spending. They have to balance their budgets. And as they do that, we at the Eco-Fiscal Commission have a unique opportunity to introduce ourselves into that process and offer them options that they may not have thought of in terms of gaining revenue and making better choices. Briss's comment, I think, is very enlightening. It's a different economy. And why don't we just keep it revenue neutral, as you say, even if people, it's tough for them, but change fiscality in such a way where you reduce carbon, gain the revenue you make, and do it the right way. That's where the Eco-Fiscal Commission would like to be able to make a contribution. Brice?
I just wanted to add that when you're talking about carbon trading, the most important word is cap. Yeah. Don't forget, the cap is going down all the time. And that's the important part of it.
But that didn't happen in Europe, and I'm concerned about the
Of course it happened in Europe. All our commitments from Kyoto, we've fulfilled them. Now, some people are saying, the price is not enough. Well, if we have succeeded at a low price, well, good for us.
This is reassuring on the whole, but climate change is very much a political problem, and the solution obviously would be political, but as Monsieur Charest said, politicians are part of the problem. People don't believe you at times, and for good reason. Now that you're an ex-politician,
except for me, of course,
At the same time,
I never had popularity problems in Quebec.
I think I'm quite heartened by the work of the Eco-Fiscal Commission, and perhaps you can elaborate a bit on that, because that really very much is leadership on this issue, kind of from the ground up, and certainly it certainly is an example of leadership at a decentralized level, because as we all know, the federal government really isn't anywhere on this issue, and unfortunately going into Paris, I can't see there being much promise of a very productive contribution by the federal government given its current configuration. But having said that, there clearly is a lot of leadership in the Eco-Fiscal Commission, your work, and those of the business leaders and the academics on that is showing the kind of groundswell of public support that is moving towards this, despite perhaps the lack of leadership of the federal government. So I think there's a lot of reasons to be very very positive. But perhaps you can just elaborate a bit on that, because in my mind, the game change was huge to have President of Suncor basically get up and say, "Yeah, come on, bring it on. We're ready to do business. Just make it clear." And make it sensible, and we're all for it. So, I mean, that to me is a game changer politically in terms of the business community in Canada. So it's now time to get on and do the job. And, you know, if this government won't do it, maybe another government will.
And you know, my sense is that in the business community for a number of years now, really years, there's an assumption that there is going to be a carbon tax. And the companies you're referring to, they know that. They're not in denial about it, and they're trying to, and they model it. They try to figure out what it means for them. And actually, objectively, as they accept that that will happen, what they don't like is all the uncertainty around it. And they do reach the point where they say, you know, if this is going to happen, and actually we think it can work, let's do it. Let's stop, you know, this playing around with it. Let's get it done. Exactly. Now, on the Eco-Fiscal Commission, it's a great example of timing and enlightenment on the part of a certain number of people. Chris Reagan is the economist from McGill who decided, who initiated this idea, brought it to a number of other people, and he's put together just a stellar group of economists who work around this. He went to get private sector funding and for this initiative. He clearly, in the outset, this is interesting, said, I'm not going to engage the federal government because the federal government isn't on this, and frankly, if we do, it'll end up being a conversation of you're right, and I'm right and you're wrong, and it's actually will just waste energy and time, won't go anywhere. I'm going to focus, and we're going to focus on the provinces and work with them, and we're going to use the opportunity, and the timing of it is, you have to, and this applies to Quebec, for example, you're going to have to look at how you structure your spending because you have to balance your budget. Well, while you're at it, this is a very good time to look at how you structure your spending, and in such a way that you can make better environmental choices. That's what the Eco-Fiscal Commission's trying to do with these folks, and say, I will help you map out what the options are. And then you can choose to, and then he put together a consultative group that includes Preston Manning and myself. I mean, no one who would have thought that we'd be sitting around the same table. And who has, Mr. Manning, by the way, who I don't know that well, but has on this issue has spoken out, has quite an enlightened view. And Paul Martin and others. And that's where the Eco-Fiscal Commission's doing. And I like it. I think the potential of the commission really moving things along is there.
I'm going to add in this interesting historical note, which John actually wouldn't know, is that in some ways the Eco-Fiscal Commission started in this room. I had given Alan Rock sets up, he calls them these president's lectures. Basically, we give a talk to the public, and mine was on the wealth of nature, which is, if Adam Smith was asked to solve our environmental problems, how would he solve them? And Chris, at the time, was the visiting economist in the Department of Finance, the Clifford Clark chair. And so he came up to me afterwards, and he said, this is a good idea, I agree with you, how do we do it? And in some ways, the two big problems at the time, we'd had an election, as you'll recall, a few years before that, in which the green shift was a big issue. And in many ways, that had made carbon pricing a political third rail in Canadian politics. There's this perception, even though we had one province actually doing it with a fair high degree of success, there was a perception east of British Columbia that carbon pricing was both ineffective and political suicide. And so we had to solve both those problems. You had to build a foundation of economic credibility under the idea, and you had to get it out of this left-right political war, because after that happens, the problem is, and we've talked about political stability, is really critical. One of the real lessons of any effective climate policy is it has to endure across governments. Every time the election happens and parties change, you can't rip up the previous government's policies and start all over again, or you go back to zero. And so carbon pricing had really kind of become that in Canada. It was a political no-go zone. So that's really a lot of the theory Jean talked about was informed by those two things. You needed to have political leaders from across the political spectrum. You needed to have conservative leaders like Jim Dinning, Preston Manning saying you needed to have people like Mike Harcourt, an NDP, or you need to have Jean Charest, who no one knows what party he's from,
Thank you.
And Paul Martin.
I take that as a compliment.
It
by
is.
the way.
They all like you. So you needed to get to the point that you couldn't say this is a left or right issue. You had to be a politically legitimate issue, and Kristen's talked about that in Norway a lot, that the parties are now competing for who gets to take credit for these policies. And we've gotten that way on deficits. You think about the early years of deficit fighting, it was seen as a right-wing issue, but pretty soon it also became seen as investing in the future of healthcare and social programs and your kids, and all of a sudden left and right governments all did it, and they tweaked in how they did it. So the second part, though, is the economic credibility. And to do that, you needed to have some of the most credible economists in Canada saying this is a good idea. Not the environmental economists, but people like Chris Reagan, who was shortlisted for the Governor General of the Bank of Canada job. People like Don Drummond, the former chief economist at TD Bank. People like the chief economist for the Conference Board of Canada. People like Jack Mintz, who's actually seen as a right-wing fiscal economist. You needed to have those folks saying this is a good idea for economic reasons. This is an economically sensible thing for the country's future. And political folks like Jean and Paul Martin and Preston Manning saying, and politically we need to do this. And I got to tell you, it's succeeded. We spent, then there's the next 3 years of just all the work under the surface to put all that together, which that'll be my memoirs, but and I don't recommend them. But it succeeded far more than we ever would have expected. And part of that's luck. Part of that is the timing of this issue has come around. Part of that is there's an alignment among premiers right now, which makes this a receptive issue, so timing matters. But we still got a long way to go. We're just talking about this in Canada right now. We got to move, some provinces are acting, but we have to take the momentum now and really turn it into action. So ecofiscal has a lot of potential, and we have to continue that potential and turn it into results. And that's really the next 12 months of challenge, I would say. That was a long, I'm not even supposed to speak probably.
Yeah, that's very good.
One more question before the break, and then we can continue on after. Oh, sorry, Chris, I'm really sorry, I forgot.
Very short comment, because just
Go
one
ahead.
short comment, because I think what is very important for voters and the public to know and be aware of is that they have much more power than they believe they have. Because they can create the space for brave politicians on the left or the right side. And in Norway, I think when you ask the voters after an election, which topic, which political topic decided which party you voted for, climate is mentioned by 9% of the voters. All politicians know that. Health, economy, education is on top. It's important topics. But if you really are going to give some space to those who are brave on the left or the right side, then you could campaign to lift the topic higher on the agenda, because that is extremely, it's in fact deciding what kind of climate policy you will have. Yeah.
So
So don't
question.
lean back and only point at the politicians. You get the politicians that you vote for.
Exactly.
That's right.
So
But
one question, then we'll take a break and continue.
If you live in a little island, it's number one.
Yeah, you're drowning.
Gonna be very brief. I'm a PhD student here in University of Ottawa. I wanted to ask you, the three of the panelists, if you consider it is worth to embrace and support some other economic policies, international economic politics for climate change, because as you said, Monsieur Charette, the difference between the Montreal Protocol and climate change is that Montreal Protocol, or the ozone layer problem, was specifically one or maybe two gases, and climate change has a different way of gases, which CO2 is one of them. It's not the worst. And climate change has also a lot of loops. I mean, forestry, sea, and the ocean problem. So it's an even more complex problem than the ozone layer. So like just taxing only one gas or that may not give us a lot of hope. So if any of you consider different approaches and market approaches to the problem.
And there are several, I guess. For example, we haven't talked, and you're right, we can very easily get enthused about carbon trading because that's what's in front of us now. And so, and we're human beings. We tend to, be attracted by what may be flavor of the month, and it's normal. We focus and we can lose sight of the bigger picture, including carbon sinks. You know, Canada has 10% of the world's forest. We have a global responsibility as a country to manage our forest. It's not a local, it's not a national, it's a global responsibility. And we should live up to that and say so and affirm it and say, you know, we're going to do it. And the same is true on other, as you mentioned, other type, methane, for example, and other greenhouse gases that have a huge effect on and some of them much more powerful than CO2.
Well, CO2 is the most important because it lives that long.
Yes.
Methane is very strong, but lives for 25 years. CO2 from several hundred, so well.
It varies. Brice,
I would like to make a little comment to make you feel the fun of it. The ozone layer was a success, as Jean said, and we replaced the CFCs by HFCs. And we discovered that HFCs are very bad for the climate. Sorry, that's the other convention. It's the other convention. The other convention is the climate. So we go in the climate, and we decide to plant 1,000 hectares of eucalyptus to capture the carbon. Have you thought about biodiversity? It's the other convention down there. So that's one of our problems we face exactly. Cutting the nature in sausage, you know, like that. We lose the big picture. So it's absolutely true. And what's happening now, and where we need your help, and all of us, is to try to add the production of nature to the production of humans. As you know, for the time being, we have problems with bees. Bees are, we don't know why. But bees are absolutely essential for pollinating the culture. We're going to lose, I don't know, 20% of the crops if we don't have any more bees.
If they go, we go.
Sorry?
He said, if we go, we go. And he's not talking about the
That's
timing
Einstein,
of the panel.
but it's a hoax.
About bees.
Yes. But it's the same thing if you go to some countries. For instance, you take a bottle of water. In the price of the bottle of water, you have the salary of the forest keeper, because if you don't have forest, you don't have water. So that's the main one of our challenges right now. How can we invent this new economy, which is going to add the production of nature and what people do for nothing? Because if people who live in the houses, they go on strike, all the economy disappears, but you don't pay the people who live in the house or whatever. Okay, so all this is very important, but we don't know how to do it yet. And if we can do that and have the good indicators and understand what's happening, we'll have the good taxation system after, and we'll be able to, you know, to solve our problems and to live in a better way. So this is our task. We have two tasks, in my view. Can I just finish that? Two tasks. One task is to invent planetary policies, which doesn't exist. We have planetary problems. It's new, because before the planet was very, very strong, no problem with the human beings. There were little ants. Now, there's 9 billion soon, and lots of technology and fossil fuels. So we have planetary problems, biodiversity, high seas, etc. Can we invent a forum, a platform for planetary policies? And can we have it agreed by everybody in the world? That's one problem. Second problem, greening the economy, as I said. That's our two main urgent tasks. And climate is one part of it, the most important, the most threatening right now, but it's only one of them. So we have to try to solve all of them at the same time. The double dividend, all that sort of smart policies, no regrets. That's what we have to do. Let's all be smart. Ali, it's decided. Yes. Thank you.
There should be some refreshments at the back, and after that we will hear from 3 of the world's smartest academic thinkers on how we do this.